God forbid, I'm going to give my opinion out over the internet. As many of you are likely aware, Mobile Fidelity has gotten themselves embroiled into a new controversy over the new one-step release of Michael Jackson's Thriller. Now, there's supposed to be 40,000 copies of this release, and one audiophile had brought up that if they truly wanted to make a one-step version of this release, this might entail them playing the tape back 40,000 times, which would of course cause significant wear. Now, as somebody who has actually mixed an album and sent it to a mastering engineer in order to get records pressed, I'd like to address this controversy because it appears that a lot of it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of what a mastering engineer actually does. So I'm going to go ahead and lay that out for you right now. So it appears that there are two common misconceptions of what a mastering engineer actually is. One of those seems to come from artists who assume that this is the person who is pushing faders on an SSL console, listening to individual tracks, adjusting EQ and compression between those tracks, and trying to get them to fit together as one cohesive whole, but really that's the job of a mixing engineer. More pertinent to this discussion would be the old school understanding of what a mastering engineer was, and that was creating the final lacquer used to create the records themselves. But really, that's not what a master truly is. So I'm just going to put it out there very simply. The job of the mastering engineer is to listen to that final two-track mix created by the mix engineer, and then make subtle, very small tweaks to it, maybe regarding some of the EQ choices, add a little bit of compression, maybe a little saturation here and there, just to prepare it for the final playback medium. New masters are pretty much always either committed to tape or digitally before they actually cut the mother that creates these stampers. Now, I can't entirely fault the layman for having this misconception, as referring to it as the original master recording is a little bit misleading. One could certainly argue that the original mixdown is the original master, but realistically it's just the master for all of the subsequent masters to be made. In order to give you guys a better understanding of what Mobile Fidelity most likely actually means when they're talking about the original master recording, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of historical context. Prior to the advent of digital recording technology, what you would typically see is that when a mix engineer bounces down that final two-track stereo mix, they would then create multiple copies of this mix and then send it out to different mastering engineers. So if you look on something like Discogs, for example, if you looked at any album released prior to 1980, more than likely you'll see tons of different variants of the same record released on the same year by different mastering engineers. And this is because it wasn't really economical to send one tape to numerous different regions in order to get different pressings cut for different countries. Today, with a digital file, it's a lot easier to just use the exact same master for every single cut. So back in the 1970s, when Mobile Fidelity started out, this was actually a very meaningful distinction, because more than likely whatever record it is that you were purchasing wasn't using the original tape. So really, where does this leave us? So the other big part of this controversy comes from the idea that Mobile Fidelity might actually be using digital sourcing of some kind to actually create a lot of these records. Now, a lot of these people might just be analog purists, and I do believe this also kind of comes down to a misunderstanding of what makes analog special. Now, that's an entirely different can of worms. I might get into that another day when discussing something like the sparse code and why it may not be the most useful way of determining the quality of any given CD. Ultimately, it's kind of irrelevant as to whether or not they were using a digital source to create a lot of these lacquers or even just to create these records, so long as what they used to remaster the album was the original master tape. So if you actually made it through this video, I'd like to say I really appreciate it. Hopefully this cleared up any kind of confusion if you had any. If anyone's curious, the music that I played throughout this video is actually my band, Luxury Furniture Store. It's our debut album, Bed Rot. I hope you guys will tolerate my shameless plug. Thanks again for tuning in. Hopefully you'll join me again if I ever make another one of these videos. Appreciate it.